So you said you found legume after stopping spreading cheese sludge.
Yes. Yeah.
And you noticed the symbiosis was working.
Yeah.
And I felt not so many people picked that difference so instantly. So why you noticed?
Well, I suppose we're very lucky in that we have an orchard which stays in the one place and can be uninterfered with for many, many years. Okay, so we are able to observe it. And if you like, when we planted these trees, which is over 30 years ago, we just planted the trees. We didn't plant anything else. All the other things that are in the orchard now came by their own means. They planted them. They're wild, they're natural. So when we were spreading manure, which you guys told me you didn't approve of, certain plants enjoyed this. I'm only surmising this now. I don't know. I regard the goings-on of nature as a wonderful mystery. Mm-hmm. It's not magic, but it is mysterious. Mm-hmm. And it's something that is so very big, and there's so much symbiosis going on that we will never understand it. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to understand it. There's something bigger than us going on here. So initially, the weeds that came in, or the plants, I don't like to call them weeds, the plants that happened to arrive, some of them didn't survive for very long, but they enjoyed whatever was happening in the farm. And initially we were putting on a lot of dung, and then eventually a lot of cheese sludge from the cheese factory. And the plants that liked this, mostly grasses, mm-hmm. and shallow-rooted grasses, did very well. Mm-hmm. And they seemed to outperform the other plants, which generally weren't as tall. Things like clover and the pea, members of the pea family, the vetches and that, the grasses grew above them and shaded them out. Mm-hmm. And they also competed, presumably, with the apple for moisture and for surface nutrients. So when we started the initial experiment, because you suggested that we do, the grasses suddenly didn't have any nutrients, and so they couldn't grow so well. So they stayed low, and the clovers and the vetches and that, like this, they had more sunlight and so on, and they grew very well. And of course they're not in competition with the apple tree. They're in symbiosis with the apple tree, and they supply the apple tree, particularly and simplistically, with the nitrogen. Because the air we breathe, I think it's 78% nitrogen, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But this nitrogen is not accessible by the apple tree. But it can be made accessible by the clover, which acts with the bacteria in the soil. The clover can't make it accessible itself either. It has to go through some arrangement with the bacteria. Mm-hmm. And now, if you go out to look at the apple trees, they're absolutely beautiful. But remember, they've had 35 years to develop a relationship, not just with the soil, not just with the microbes in the soil, but also with their sister plants, the plants that are growing up around them. And those plants have to exist according to the conditions in which they are. Mm-hmm. You know, they exist in the shade of the apple trees, but also in association with the other plants that are around them. And it's like nations, like people. Plants that do not work together don't thrive. and don't survive. And the plants that do work with the other plants, they seem to thrive and succeed. All the plants around them. I've even reached the stage now where I don't like to call it an apple orchard, because that implies that it's just for apples.
Yeah.
I like to call it an apple forest, so that it's actually a forest now of all natural plants on the ground and high, low and high, of which apples are one. But it's a much more natural thing. And it's wonderful. Every year is better.
Yeah.
Better. The normal life, apples don't produce the same crop every year. It's like that. You tend to have an off year and an on year, off year and an on year. But with my orchard, it's like that.
That's amazing.
You know, every on year is better than the last on year. Every off year is better than the last off year.
Yeah. So natural agriculture olive oil in Italy, they said there's on year, off year.
Yeah.
Off year. Still continues.
Yeah.
But this apple gradually increasing.
Yeah, I don't know how long it'll keep increasing. It says the ground response. Remember, we did spray with chemicals up until 1986. And we had very enthusiastically used chemicals all through the 1960s, 1970s. So the soil was dead. So we started with dead soil. We put in slurry and that kind of thing to try and introduce microbes. We didn't understand anything about microbes. Nobody ever will. But any time, even if the cat died, we'd throw it into the orchard, to try and introduce microbes. We don't know what they are, but just get the most in. And the good ones will stay when they have a symbiosis with the other ones and with the tree, and the bad ones will probably go away. And it's been an extraordinary thing to watch because, for example, most apple orchards in Ireland anyway, and I think in England as well, have a big problem with a thing called apple canker. It's a disease which gets in through any wounds in the bark, and it can often kill a tree. And a lot of orchards are suffering from it, the ones who use chemicals. We don't have any. We did have some, and in fact when we buy new trees, they come from an orchard which is not organic, and we plant the trees, and some of the varieties are very susceptible, and we get some apple canker, but we ignore it. We don't even worry about it, and it goes away. And now, if you look at our orchard, it's very hard to find any. There will be some. It's not very strong, it's not very dangerous, and it's very hard to find. Whereas my chemical friends who have apple orchards, probably one of the biggest problems they have is canker. And a lot of them have to pull the orchard out because the canker is so strong. And I think, this is just my hypothesis, that the reason for that is there is a microbe of some kind. It could be a virus, it could be a bacteria, it could be a fungus that eats the canker bacteria. But it is very susceptible to chemicals. So when you spray the orchard, you kill this. I call it the canker doctor. I haven't identified it yet. I think there will be lots of money if somebody did go out and act. It'd be very easy to identify, but I'm not a scientist. I don't know. But the canker doctor is killed by the first flush of a chemical you put on, so canker thrives. It has nothing to stop it. And I think this is possibly an example of one of the many things that the microbes do with each other. They form a symbiosis, which is killed by the first blow of a chemical. And that is why those microbes are very mysterious. We have them in our stomachs as well. We are part of this. We are part of nature. We have a right to be here. We're not interlopers. What we don't have a right to is, we don't have a right to think this all belongs to us and it's all for us and we can do whatever we like to it. We can't, and we will suffer if we do. So that is why we've discovered now, and it wasn't part of the plan when we started out, that our biggest, most popular product that we produce from this wonderful apple forest is vinegar, because the vinegar is the product of these microbes. And we're the only people who can produce it, because if you put a whiff of a fungicide in your orchard, you disturb the microbial balance. It's like having a chair, a lovely four-legged chair, and you rip one leg off. You know, it will balance it. You don't know what it'll do from then on. And that's what happens when you start messing around with chemicals in a beautiful natural environment. You've got to try and leave that balance going there. So those microbes are in vinegar. When we harvest our apples, we just crush them. We don't clean them. We don't put any sulfur dioxide in it or anything like that. We leave the microbes in it. We just get the juice out, and we put them in a barrel, and we close the top, and they ferment. Every single time, we leave them from this time of year, from October, November, we leave the juice in the barrel for the whole of the winter, and we come back in the spring, in March, April, and always the barrel is full of lovely cider. I mean, always. We've never, ever, ever had a failure. We've never had a failed barrel. We've never opened a barrel and, oh, that's terrible, or it hasn't fermented. Why? Because nature is very reliable. Yeah, and it's not broken. It doesn't need us to do anything. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.